Hey folks, Dust here, and now we can finally talk about the changes to Made in Brazil as they head into the 2019 season. As of course it was announced long ago that Stewie of course had been traded to Team Liquid, and I already talked about that side of the move, but in return it was of course Zeus and Taco going over to Made in Brazil, and we've been waiting on who the fifth was going to be, and though it had been reported some time ago who that fifth was going to be, and we all pretty much knew who it was going to be, for some reason it took forever when some extra teases and whatever, to each their own, but we finally do have the official announcement that Felps is going to be their fifth, and so this essentially brings together the SK lineup of 2017. The only difference being is back then they didn't have a coach. Now they have Zeus as a coach for the lineup going forward, and so I wanted to talk through Made in Brazil and just talk about this move. So the first question, like I always ask in these videos, is did Made in Brazil need to make a move? And I think that the answer to this question is a little bit more in a gray area compared to some of the other roster moves. And maybe some people wouldn't expect that. Maybe some people, to them, it is clear-cut they needed to make a move. Some people, maybe clear-cut it's not. But I think that the stance is somewhere in the middle. You know, for instance, the Liquid move was forced. They had to make that move. It wasn't their decision to make it. And so in that case, there wasn't really even a need to explore that topic. In a case like Complexity, I think that they definitely needed to make a move. I think that Optic definitely needed to make moves because you could just tell that, you know, their performances really made it evident that they needed to make moves. But when it comes to Made in Brazil, like I said, it's a little bit more gray. And this is because I feel like their results at times were fine or up to par. They very rarely had huge disappointments. I mean, certainly maybe they had hit a ceiling they weren't going to break past, and that's reason enough to make a move to work your way up. But I mean, I think they were legitimately up in maybe the bottom end of the top 5 of the world, you know, maybe number 6, certainly towards the top end of the top 10. And this is really because, you know, in smaller events, it took care of business, like that Zotac event. They were able to win it. Granted, they didn't really beat anybody of big value, just like playing Flash and MVP PK and Kingwin. Then I think at Stockholm, they had a pretty decent run. I mean, they beat Mousesports in a best of 3. They only get eliminated by Astralis. One of those matches, they took them to 14-16. So when you're getting eliminated by Astralis, the best team in the world, you can't really be too disappointed in that, especially since they hadn't been together that long at the time at Stockholm, and they had only played, you know, E-League Premier and then the Zotac event. So this is their 3rd event together, going up against the best team in the world who had been playing together, you know, the bulk of the year and were just monsters. So couldn't really complain about that. Then they get a top 4 finish at the major, losing to Navi in the semifinals after having beat Complexity in the quarters, which granted doesn't really earn you a whole lot of credit. And then, you know, they had beat NIP in a best of 3 decider to make it to the playoffs, which is a pretty decent win. They had a couple of cool best of 1 wins throughout. So the major, all in all, I think really the only reason why I was disappointing was because in the fashion in which they got beat by Navi. It wasn't even really competitive, especially that second map on Dust 2. They didn't even look in it at all. So that was a bit concerning. But then they go into Istanbul, and they do really well here. I mean, they go through the groups without too much trouble, only really losing to Astralis and tying in IP, but winning the games they needed. And then they play Astralis in the finals, and this was one of the better best of 3s of the year as far as how competitive it was and how much Astralis got pushed up against the ropes. I mean, we did see that Made in Brazil beat them on a map in map 2 of the series, and then map 3 was a 14-16 on Inferno. They had a chance to beat Astralis and win Istanbul. Like, it was very close. Then after that, though, is where some disappointment comes in. This is where you do start to worry about Made in Brazil, because at IEM Chicago, they don't really do much of anything. They lose their best of 3s to FaZe and Energy and go out in the group stages. And that's after Copenhagen, where they lost every single map they played there. They went 0-5 in the group stages that event. So those 2 events combined were definitely where you start to worry a little bit about Made in Brazil. But then it felt like they had a little bit of a recovery, right? Because they go to the ECS Season 6 finals and they take 2nd place. And this includes having beat Astralis in the best of 3 in the group stages after beating Mousesports in the best of 1. So they get 1st seed in the group. They beat North in the semifinals pretty handedly. And then they have another really close series to Astralis, very reminiscent of what happened in Istanbul, where, I mean, they get 0-2'd, sure, but one map was 14-16, the other map was double overtime. So looked pretty sharp at this event. That's a pretty big 2nd place finish. Then at EPL Season 8, they get another top 4 finish. They beat Mousesports in best of 3. They get the revenge against Energy, who had given them problems at Chicago. And they only lose to Team Liquid, which is like maybe the number 2 team in the world, at worst number 3 behind Navi. So, I mean, they are certainly taking care of business against, you know, kind of the lower end teams. And they're really only struggling against teams like Astralis and Liquid, you know, teams that are ranked above them. And then Lisbon, I'm not really going to talk too much about this because apparently the team already knew that they were splitting up, you know, at Lisbon. So, Yeah, they don't really do much here. And then also the format of Blast is like, even if you go out in groups, I mean, you can sometimes go out in groups, with a couple of wins and like a tie and stuff like that. So it's really hard to read into that one too much. So, I mean, when you look at the stretch of events, it wasn't like it was that bad. Like you needed to hit some type of panic button, like all hope was lost. They certainly had some decent results at times. They went toe-to-toe with Astralis in some big ways in some really close games, even beat them in a best-of-3 in one situation. They were always beating Mousesports when they went up against them, which is kind of another team that's kind of hanging around the middle of the top 10. They, again, weren't really in a position where it was like panic mode. But again, you can make the argument that, well, they're not advancing though. Like they're not climbing the totem pole. They're not winning the trophies at bigger events. They're not hitting, I'm sure, a goal that they had, which is to be the best team in the world. And they certainly weren't going to do that. And it is also true that in some of these tournaments, they didn't beat anybody of really big name value other than like that Astralis best of 3, maybe the NIP best of 3 at Face It's Major, and maybe some of the Mousesports series you might consider some big wins. But other than that, yeah, they didn't really have any huge titles or victories or anything like that. So that's kind of the debate you have to have. For me, I think maybe you could have seen how things went going forward with more time together, but I can understand some of the challenges they were facing that they felt like they needed to address. Because here's the thing. There was a couple of big issues with the team. For one, it did feel like some of the individuals weren't performing really well consistently at all, other than Cold. There were times when Fur looked good, but then times where he looked like really a shadow of himself, which has been kind of the average. Like, he doesn't look anything like the Fur of 2017 or prior. Had a lot more struggles this year than really other year in recent memory. So that was certainly a big issue. Individual form on him. Obviously, Sui2K and Tarek were having their issues, having consistent individual form. It seemed like Fallen was getting his act together. He had a couple of off events, particularly some of the Blast Pro events. He really kind of struggled at those 3: Istanbul, Copenhagen, and Lisbon. But some of the other events, he looked like, like his old self again, like, 2016 Fallen, so to speak. So there was a case of individual form being an issue. There also was a case that their map pools seemed a little bit dodgy at best, definitely way weaker than previous iterations of this team's map pools. They were really good on Dust 2. You could certainly point to that. I mean, they had a couple of blunders on it, but overall pretty good on Dust 2. Their Mirage was pretty good, I would say. Really good record there. Then after that, though, is where it starts getting a little bit weird because their Inferno was kind of mixed results. Definitely could play it, but definitely didn't have like some crazy win rate on it. Trains the same way, very small win rate on that map. Positive win rate, rather. They had a slight negative win rate on Cash, meant that had previously been really strong for them. Their overpass was really unreliable. I mean, I know a couple of their losses were to Astralis, one of which was a double overtime game, and they had even a win over Astralis at one point, but it still wasn't like really reliable. And then they didn't play Nuke, right? So out of the 7-map pool, you had a permaban of Nuke, essentially, and you had 2 maps that you were, losing more than you were winning it. Then you had a couple of maps that were like just on the verge of being a positive win rate. So their map pool definitely wasn't as strong as it had been, like I said, in previous versions of this team when they were, SK and Luminosity and things of that nature. And the other big issue I noticed is that while they were pretty strong in early round situations, like their initial setups, their kind of initial defaults would look good as they were, working for map control, looking for picks, looking for what mid-round execute they might want to go into. Those situations, they seemed fine. But it did seem like they would crumble in some of the mid-round situations, like in the 3v3s or in the post plants or in retakes. That's where it seemed like things would go a little bit awry, more so than you would hope. Like you would think you should close out those rounds, but it did really feel like they struggled in those situations a lot, like when things started to break down. Like maybe when communication was faster paced and more required. Maybe that's when some of the language barrier issues would come into play. And, even though they claim that, the communication things got better over time. I mean, I think Swag, even on his personal stream when he stood in for them at Lisbon, had already kind of talked about that, even when he was playing with them, communication was weird and, definitely seemed like it was an issue at times. So I think that they never really broke past that. Even if it got better, even if it got to a situation where it was bearable, it was definitely never optimal. And so you have to wonder if that was a big factor. Also, you just have to wonder if there's like a clash in play style, a clash in culture, a clash in what people wanted out of the team, even on the coaching end, maybe the type of, discipline system that Yanko wants didn't seek up with certain players. So there definitely seemed to be some mismatches and philosophy on the game, personality, communication issues, and all these different things. So when you add that all up, it does make sense why this move had to happen. I mean, like I said, I think you could have given it more time. Maybe it could have gotten better, but all in all, I can see as to why they would do this. So again, this leads me to talking about what this team is now. And again, this is essentially the SK team of 2017, which is a team that was fairly successful. I mean, they had a little bit of a weird start because they did so well at that DreamHack Masters Las Vegas event in 2017, but then really struggled in a couple events. Then they went on that run of 6 events where they won 5 out of 6 events. Some of them were smaller events where they didn't really beat anybody of note, to be 100% honest with you. But then there was a couple events where they looked really impressive, like when they beat FaZe to win the Sydney title, for instance, or when they won Cologne by beating FaZe and Cloud9 and things of that nature. And this is where Cloud9 was starting to ramp up a little bit heading into 2018, where, of course, they won the E-League Boston Major. So they had a couple of pretty big events here. But then they certainly did start to fall apart towards the end, like, that E-League Premier 2017 event where they went out so early. Felt like they didn't really get what they wanted out of that Masters Malmo event as well. Losing to North in G2 and only getting top 8. So they definitely had their issues, but still, all in all, a pretty good team outside of the 2016 version of the team, like the LGSK team that, won the 2 majors, had all the top 4 finishes, one of the best teams of all time. This was probably like number 2 as far as like best lineup that the team was ever able to put together from when they came on in the scene in 2015 to the present. So not a bad team. I think one of the key problems with the team was just simply that, I think there was this rough transition period where Fallen kind of learned that he was going to have to take a step back and be more of a supportive factor in order to really get the most out of Felps and Fur as an entry duo. And so I think that was a big adjustment for him, maybe in his own playing style. Obviously, they were switching up their map pool. What maps they were focusing on now were different from the maps they were focusing on in the past. I mean, I think one of the biggest examples of that is probably the transition into being more of a cash team, where it had been a map that they had kind of strayed away from. They definitely had a pretty decent map pool, though. They were really strong on Mirage, really strong on Cash. Cobblestone was big for them, obviously not in the map pool anymore, but at the time it was a really big map for them. So they definitely had some strong suits, but they definitely had some issues as well. And I think with the team coming together now, again, the big difference is going to be that Zeus is going to be the coach. They're going to have a third perspective to kind of help them out, to an outside perspective, so to speak. They are also going to have some of these players who have been through more and more experience, maybe have learned more lessons, particularly someone like Taco, who spent all this time on Liquid, having all that success, adjusting as a player. I think that he is going to come back maybe with different ideas. Maybe Zeus is going to have different ideas from playing alongside different players, or coaching, I should say, alongside different players, and kind of picking up on things. So I think that they're going to have maybe fresh ideas and a fresh perspective, even though it is the same lineup that came from 2017. And usually when you go back to an older lineup, it doesn't always work out that well. It can be kind of risky to do that. I think that one of some of the biggest concerns, I should say, for me on this team is going to be, the individual form of Fur has been a problem. Like I said, he's a shadow of himself. If you compared him in 2017 or even prior to that, was such a strong player, was a pivotal part of this team's identity. And I think that, him struggling to perform is big for this team. Like, he was such an X factor for them, so impactful. I think that you have to figure out how to get him back into an area where he can perform really well. Felps is another character that you have to be really worried about, because he did start falling apart the last few events he played with SK in 2017, which is part of the reason why he got removed from the team. And he has had his struggles trying to play on other teams like NTC and, INTS. Granted, he was doing in-game leading duties on INTS, so that put extra strain on him and probably did impact his individual level of play. But you do wonder, is he going to be able to have individual form like he had, in the earlier parts of SK 2017, when he was actually a really strong player and a big contribution to, some of the titles that they won? Like that guy that was on Tempo Storm, if you want to go back even further, who was, looking like a super sick up-and-coming player. Because in my mind, in theory, the idea of Fur and Felps going in together as an entry combo should be sick. That should be a crazy tool to use to open up areas of the map or open up bomb sites. Then you have, Fallen kind of sitting back a little bit more with the AWP. Then you have Cold and Taco playing edges of the map, roles they are very comfortable in and definitely can do a lot from, with the, Taco being more of a supportive factor. That should be a super sick formation of the team. And it definitely worked for them on certain maps and at certain periods of time through 2017, but then it just kind of had its hiccups, primarily I think because Fallen was a little bit out of place at times. He had to take more of a step back. But I think that Fallen went through that again with the Tarek and Stewie 2K lineup. On their T side, you notice he was kind of sitting back and throwing utility and kind of setting up other players. And I feel like he was able to adjust to that type of situation a lot better. And I think that he can carry that lesson over to this team, being able to still find a way to be useful, even if he's not going to be the one taking charge of the AWP. I think there will still be some rounds in some situations where he goes for a pick on T side, but I think that he can, learn how to be a little bit more supportive. And he actually had some really crazy statistics for 2018 for like flash assists and things like that. He was like one of the top 5 players in the world when it came to flashbang statistics and stuff like that. So I think that he really has embraced that a lot better than he did back in 2017, and I think that will serve them well. And I think it really just will come down to how is Zeus able to help them, patch up some things as a coach. How is the individual form of players like Felps and Fur going to be going forward? Are they going to be able to do well? Because I feel like I know I'm going to get it for Cole. I know I'm going to get it from Taco. I feel like those two pieces, you know what you're going to get, and you're going to get what you need from them to be a successful team. But I think it'll really come down to how Felps and Fur work together, how their individual form shapes up, and then how Fallen is able to find his way with the AWP. Yeah, I think I saw some good signs from, Made in Brazil at Stewie 2K and Tarek. If he can keep that up, I think they'll definitely have enough firepower to be very dangerous and be able to do what they need to do. I think it'll just come down to, again, with, a full Brazilian team, with better communication, can they patch up some of these mid to late round situations that would really come back to haunt them throughout 2018 and really cause them to struggle to close out rounds and get the rounds they needed to win games instead of having close losses. Those tries to actually beat them and get titles. That's going to be what needs to be kept an eye on. Obviously, also figuring out their map pool is going to be huge. Again, I already kind of talked about how they had, a permaban and 2 maps they weren't really strong on. So they only had, like 2 or 3 super reliable maps and then 1 or 2 iffy ones. And then basically, 3 that weren't reliable at all, or it's permaban. So I think that those are going to be the big focuses. And I think that they certainly can be a strong team going forward. I think there's still hope there. I think there's just a lot of things though that you have to go right, I guess you could say, in order for them to be the team they need to be. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.